Добрий день! Вітаю вчителів, учнів та батьків на Leadership Speaker Series від імені української телемережі «Контакт», молодіжної телепрограми «Kontakt Next Generation», Української шкільної ради при Toronto та Національної української освітньої ради КУК. Мене звати Олександра Голик. My name is Alexandra Holek and I'm the show host of Kontakt Next Gen and I'll also be the moderator for today's session. Серію цих зустрічей ми організували для українських старшокласників для того, щоб надати вам можливість спілкування з лідерами нашої громади, надихнути вас їхніми розповідями, зрозуміти їхні думання та бачення та мати змогу побачити світ очима інших людей. Joining us today is renowned Canadian investigative journalist Victor Malarek. Victor began his career in journalism in 1970 at the Montreal Star and worked in print and TV journalism until retiring in 2017. Over the course of his career, Victor received several awards and had the opportunity to report from all around the globe. He is the author of 6 nonfiction books and 1 fiction novel, and there have been 2 movies created based on his life. After our discussion with Mr. Malarek, students, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or use the raise hand function and ask your questions verbally. We ask that you keep your cameras on out of respect for our guest and also include your city and school along with your name in your profile. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded, and I would like to invite Pani Oksana Levitska, President of the Ukrainian School Board, UCC-Toronto, to present our guest, Victor Malarek, in Ukrainian.
Thank you, Олександра. Вітаємо всіх учасників сьогоднішньої зустрічі. І сьогодні ми маємо приємність вітати Віктора Малярека. Канадці знають Віктора Малярека в більшості як жорсткого журналіста-розслідувача, який вникає в складні людські історії. Малярек, якого часто називають жорстким репортером, хрестоносцем, почав свою кар'єру в журналістиці у 1970 році як кримінальний репортер у монреальській газеті. У 1976 році він почав працювати в The Globe and Mail, канадській національній газеті, де його робота отримала 3 нагороди Міченера за віддану громадську журналістику. Пан Малярек також працював у CBC у ролі співведучого шоу The Fifth Estate, і він знову ж отримав ще одну нагороду як найкращий телевізійний журналіст Канади. Також отримав 4-ту премію Міченера. У 2000 році Віктор Малярек приєднався до серії слідчих новин CTV і працював старшим репортером-розслідувачем. І під час цієї ділянки його роботи його документальні фільми отримали 4 нагороди. І зараз пан Малярек вирішив писати твори, він багато пише, у нього вже видано 6 науково-популярних книг, а його автобіографія «Гей, Малярек», в якій він задокументував своє неспокійне та бурхливе дитинство і підліткові роки, є бестселером. І на основі цього твору створений повнометражний фільм під назвою «Малярек». І знову ж таки, пан Малярек працював на телебаченні і він створив більш ніж 325 документальних фільмів з розслідування. Тож нам цікаво буде послухати його шлях, його розповідь, його думки на те, як ми повинні робити правильний вибір, навіть коли ми маємо зробити цей вибір з кількох варіантів, які перед нами є. І ще хотіла лише сказати, що пан Малярек проводив репортажі з різних країн світу, так що у нього географія є світова щодо його професійної діяльності. Отож, вітаємо і заохочуємо до активної бесіди з паном Маляреком.
Hey, hi everybody. So I'm going to talk about not giving up, more to the point, never giving up, and never giving up on your dreams, and never giving up on your hopes, never giving up on what you want to fight for and where you want to go. Because in today's world, and in my world way back in the day, it was very easy to give up because life is really hard. And it's really hard, especially when you're a teenager, especially when you're in high school, and especially when you're trying to figure out what's it all about. I'll go into a bit of my life early on. As a kid, I came from a broken home and I ended up being in a boys' home in foster care. And life was pretty tough in the boys' home with 180 guys and having to deal with bullies and having to deal with a very abusive staff, which today would be charged with assault and battery on kids, because what they did to us was nothing short of probably torture. But I got through it. But while I was trying to get through it, I got into a jackpot full of trouble. I lived in the boys' home for 4.5 years. And when I left there at around 14 and a half, it was a pretty tough time for me. I was beginning to feel that I was a failure, that everything that had happened to me and happened to my family was my fault, and I couldn't get out of it. And I was on this treadmill, and the treadmill was to nothing but trouble. I was angry at the world, and I was trying to get even with everything that had ever happened to me by fighting, by getting in trouble with the law, becoming a juvenile delinquent, and eventually ending up in pretty tough juvenile detention centers. Everybody said that I was programmed to fail. Everything that had happened to me was to program me to fail. And yet when I was put into a solitary confinement cell, which I stayed in for a week because people were afraid of me, I started to think about my first 17 years on the planet. And I was wondering what had happened to this really scared, quiet, very religious kid who, for the first 7 years of his life, spoke Ukrainian, went to Ukrainian church, went to the community halls and whatever. And when my family broke up and we went into foster care, my two brothers and I, and then into the boys' home, and eventually where I was going, which was the detention centers, and possibly for a life of crime and into the penitentiary system if I got caught. And in that solitary confinement cell, I kept saying, what happened to me? And I was angry at myself the first day. And the second day, I was angry at the world going to get even. And the third day, I thought about my life and what had happened. And I knew that for some reason, all of this stuff that had happened to me in the boys' homes, in the detention centers, on the streets with the gangs that I was hanging out with, was not of my making. It's just that I fell into it. And everybody expected it from me because I was the boys' home kid. I was the kid from the street. I was the tough guy. And my brothers and I were, basically feared. But I was never meant to be like that. I was not like that inside. What was it that pulled me out? And I started to think about God. I started to think about Jesus. I started to think about religion. And I thought, that didn't kind of help me. Because where I am right now, I could pray to God and I could pray to everybody, and I can't get my feet out of the cement. I was trapped in this past and angry at this past. And how do I get out of it? Well, I thought about it and I said, I need to leave everything behind. All of the negative stuff that had happened to me, I have to leave it behind because I can't change it. And this is one of the traps that young people get into back in my day and back in and today. How do you get out of it and say to yourself, yeah, a lot of this stuff happened, may not be as bad as my stuff, or maybe worse, I don't know. But it happens. And one thing I learned is 90% of the time, it's not your fault. My family breaking up, the stuff that happened to my dad, the stuff that, happened to my mother was not my fault. And even though I said it must be, as a kid, I realized that everything that I was getting involved in was this anger and being stuck in a past, blaming myself for everything. And I started to think about my dreams. What do I really want to do with my life? And what I wanted to do with my life was to figure out why this happened. So it's kind of odd that I am trying to figure out why this happened, but I want to get away from why this happened. And there's a conundrum right there. How do I get out of it? Well, I fought it. And it didn't take, when I came out of the detention center after the judge let me off and said, this is your last chance, I didn't suddenly come out and say, well, it's my last chance, I'm going to turn that corner. Because every battle that you have inside your head, inside your heart, inside your soul, has to be somehow resolved before you can move on. Unfortunately, for a lot of people I know, you can't resolve it because you're stuck in it. It's so miserable that you need to find some kind of strength inside. And I think one of the things that was good for me when I was really small was that my mother instilled in me this drive, this spirit, this belief in my soul and this belief in that there's something bigger out there than just me in this skin, that there must be a reason that I'm here, and there must be a reason why I went through what I went through, and I started to take it on. And back in 1968, I answered an ad in a newspaper, and it was to be an office boy. So I figured, I'll go. And it turned out to be at a magazine, a weekend magazine in Montreal. And I was looking at what the writers were writing as I was bringing them their coffee and whatnot. And I realized that much of what they were writing wasn't saying anything about anything. It was just stuff. It was fluff. It was interesting to somebody. It wasn't interesting to me. But I knew that something clicked in my head. I can actually do something with writing. The funny thing was that in high school, I don't think I ever wrote a complete composition. I didn't really like English. I didn't actually like high school, but I didn't like English classes and all kinds of things like that. But I started to write. And what I wanted to write about was what I felt needed to be changed, what I felt had to be investigated, what I felt I had to go after. And the first thing that I understood to go after was the child welfare system, the child care system in Quebec, in Ontario, in Canada. That this is not where they take you in for protection. This is where they take you in just to warehouse you, and what happens will happen, and who cares? Nobody cares about you once you're behind those walls. What happens to you and where you go from there, because most of the guys that I knew in the boys' home, there was 180 in the one that I was in, and then later on in the detention center was 500. Most of them ended up in very, very miserable shape. They committed suicide. Several of them committed murder. Several of them were murdered. So many of them got involved in robberies, and many of them became addicted to drugs. And all of them had something that I understood. I saw them as kids, as teenagers going through this thing like me, and yet they couldn't get out of it. They couldn't seem to find the drive and the spirit, because there was nobody there to say, let me help you fulfill your dream, or let me point you in the right direction. Let me be there for you, like a mentor or a good friend or a parent. We didn't have that. But a lot of kids today seem to be stuck in something much different than what I was stuck in. A lot of kids today are stuck in this whole thing called social media. And that's become their friend, their escape, their outlet, their whatever. But they're not really attached to somebody or something that is important to their soul, to their spirit. And I think that's a tragedy of today that a lot of young people have to be careful about in getting trapped into, that you're constantly on that cell phone, that you're constantly on the internet, that you're constantly looking for yet another thing to come at you. I had to stop in the detention center, in that cell that I was in, the solitary confinement cell, to find myself, because I was on a different kind of treadmill than kids are on today. My treadmill was the street. My treadmill was getting even. My treadmill was constant anger, constant angst, constant worry, and not knowing what was going to happen to me. And I think that's today, it's a different kind of constant worry, constant angst, constant, what am I going to do? What's going to happen to me? One of the things I learned, and I like to pass that on to people, is you have to sit back and figure out what it is I'm doing, where I'm going, how I'm going to get there. You may not get all the answers. You may not get any answer right away, because it comes with time, and time sort of kind of heals wounds. My wounds were not healed right away. It took a lot of years. When I came out of the detention center at 17 and a half, I was still angry, but I knew I had to do things to change the path I was on. And that's not an easy thing for anybody to do, any kid to do, especially a teenager. How do you change the path you're on when there's nobody out there saying, hey, I'm behind you on this. You have a dream? I'm going to be backing you on that dream. I'm going to be the person that's going to say, hey, go for it. You can get a close friend or a parent or a mentor or a teacher. And when I came out, I didn't have really many people. The people in my high school were afraid of me. The teachers were afraid of me. The principal thought I was nothing but a juvenile delinquent, not going anywhere. I was always on this self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. But I knew inside I was never born and meant to fail. I was born to do something in this skin. And this is what I wanted to do with my life. And I thought about, at one point, being a detective, and I realized that I could not really manage myself in a police force with the kinds of people that I have met over the years in my investigations on things that police have been involved in. But I became a detective of sorts by joining actually the Montreal Star in 1970, and realizing that I'm not going to be a stenographer and listen to what politicians have to say municipally or provincially or federally, or go after stories because there's a press release on it. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to investigate. I wanted to go out there and make a difference in my life, but make a difference, more importantly, in other people's lives. Whether I would touch the soul of one person or a group of people, I wanted to go out and do something that was significant. And this is what I did for most of my life in the world of journalism. I spent 4 years at the Montreal Star, 17 years at the Globe and Mail, doing investigations on human rights abuses, on the abuse of women, on the abuse of the system that is supposed to care for children. I went out and did, all kinds of investigations where, when I joined the Globe and Mail in 1976, they were looking at me going, who is this guy? Because at the Globe and Mail, they all wore suits, tie, white shirt, and I walked in with very long hair, a beard, Kazakh type mustache, and was going to tell them that I'm going to do investigations. I am not going to listen to people telling me to go and cover the speech of a politician. And I did. I went out and they said, okay, go. If you can't do it, you'll be fired. But I knew that the stories were always out there, and the stories that I thought mattered were important, and I did them, and they helped people, and they made a difference in people's lives. And that's one of the things, I picked what I wanted to do, and I went after it. And it was a real battle. Coming out of the detention center, I had to drop all of my buddies. I had to make a decision that I don't want to be on the street. I don't need negativity in my life. I don't need people trying to push me to do things that I don't want to do and I know are wrong to do. And, it was tough. You leave that world behind, the street, the detention centers, the kind of gang that I was in, and I go into another world when you're basically not accepted because you're not part of, I used to hear them say, you're not our cut of the jib. I used to try to figure out what the hell is jib and why is it cut? Then I discovered that, I wasn't like them. I didn't care to be like them. I wanted to be me and do the kinds of things that I felt were important. And I think for most young people, it's to discover yourself and what it is to be you and where you're going to go being you. Because once you lose track of who you are, I don't know, you just spin in a or you get on this treadmill and you're not really going anywhere. One of the things that I discovered while I was meeting years and years later with guys from the boys' home and from the detention centers is they got trapped in cement, both feet, completely trapped in cement. And that cement was their past. And they could not get their feet out of that cement to go into the present and into the future. One of the things I did was I got my feet completely out of the cement. I'm 1 foot into the present and another foot going into the future always. I don't forget my past because it made me and shaped me and gave me the direction of where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I think that's most important for most people, is to get a direction. You can change, like I've changed in different directions. I wrote for newspapers for half of my life. And the other half of my life, I suddenly switched and I went into television to do investigations for CBC's The Fifth Estate, and then later on for 17 years with the W5 on CTV. And I did really powerful investigations that really looked at social issues and social problems affecting people and going after the bad guys, making the bad guys accountable, holding them accountable for the misery that they have caused to individuals and to groups of people on human rights issues, on abuse issues and whatever. I also thought to myself, many of the investigations I've done should be put down in books. Never written a book. And the first book I wrote actually was Hey Malarek, which was about my life experience in a broken home and going to foster care and going into the boys' home and then later into detention. And people were saying, oh, you're writing a book about yourself. I was writing a book about me, but every other kid that I met who had been in this kind of situation from a broken home or whatever. Then from there, I looked at the world of drugs. Why the world of drugs? Because so many of the guys I knew got involved in drug dealing. And I was one of these people, like, I just don't want to alter my mind or my spirit, my drive in life by numbing it or speeding it up or doing whatever on drugs. So I wrote a book on the world of drugs called Merchants of Misery. And then I did a book on immigrants because my grandparents came from Ukraine, both on my mother's side and my father's side. And I thought the kind of life and, the trials and tribulations that they had to suffer when they came to this country. And I wanted people to understand that the new immigrants who are coming here or were coming here at the time were having the same kind of difficulties that my grandparents had and my parents had as first generation Ukrainians. And so I wrote a book called Canada's Haven's Gate, Canada's immigration fiasco, in which I pointed out all the failures in the system and how to change that system. Later on, I wrote another book that dealt with a lot of my investigations for the Globe and Mail and the kinds of things that I had been involved in. I used to joke around when they said to me, "You want to go to Afghanistan?" This was in 1980 when the Soviet government, I should say, invaded Afghanistan. And I went there. And I went to Kurdistan in Iran during the hostage taking and have subsequently been to 6 or 7 war zones in my life, just to understand and see what was going on and talk about what I felt were the important issues of covering a war. And for me, it was people fighting who really didn't want to fight, but they were conscripted or forced into a situation that was not of their own making. Later on, when I left the CBC for a while, I was looking at a very small story in a newspaper that talked about some women, young girls and teenage women from Ukraine and Romania and Russia and Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Bulgaria, who were being trafficked into the sex trade worldwide. And something said to me, you got to go after this. You got to look into this. And I did. I went out and I wrote a book called The Natashas Inside the Global Sex Trade. And in those investigations, I've had guns pointed at me. I was chased by criminals. I had my life threatened, but I knew that this was an important story and went after it. Now, again, this is me wanting to do something important with my life. And it doesn't say that everybody who's listening to this should be a journalist, because that's a different kind of kettle of fish. It doesn't matter what you want to be. If you want to be an actor, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be somebody who is going to investigate why suddenly we have these pandemics and they're going to be in their microscopes and they're going to do something that's going to be phenomenal in solving a pandemic and why we have COVID or why we have the next viral infection, who knows what. But there's always something out there for someone to do that says, wow, I'm doing something important in my life. I always say to people, whatever your dream is, go for it. You may not achieve it, but there's other dreams out there too. I close my eyes one night, I'm dreaming of something and going, wow, that's pretty cool. And the next night saying, wow, that's even cooler. But you just go for your dream. And I think that's one of the most important things that I've always said to everyone. Don't give up on it. Your life may be a little bit difficult, or you need to sidetrack for a while, which I've done many times in my life. But I always go back to saying, what is it that I really want to do, and can I get to it? And if I can't get to it because it's pie in the sky or whatever, there's always another dream. There's always another issue. There's always another something you can do with your life. You can keep changing every 5 years or 10 years or 15 years because, hey, you got time when you're young to say, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to try that out. And suddenly you say, this is what I was meant to do. This is what I really want to do. with the rest of my life, or a good portion of my life. Whether it's being an artist or a singer, or whether it's being, like I said, someone who's investigating diseases, or a doctor, a lawyer, I don't know. But anyway, anybody else, anything else you can do, you can go for it. I always say, go for it, go for it, go for it, go for it. And I think if I had not gotten that drive in me as a youngster, I don't know where I would have been. Again, I always had a very strong spirit. I still have a very strong spirit. I believe in something that is bigger than me and bigger than all of us. And it says in your head, and it says in your soul and in your heart, do something that's important in your life. Now, having been in boys' homes and institutions, when I went to Ukraine to do a documentary on Help Us Help the Children, I went into the orphanages over there, and they were no different than what was happening in Quebec when I was a kid. No different at all. And seeing those kids was like seeing myself and the kids at that time, and realizing that it's really important to tell that story to our community here, but also to the overall Canadian and American community, to say, this is what's happening in Ukraine. Miserable things happen all over the world, but I wanted to wake people up to what was happening in the orphanages in Ukraine. And I get angry because while I expose this, hoping that some people will pick up the spear and go charging in and trying to change the life of these children. 100,000 kids are stuck in orphanages in Ukraine, 100,000. And many of them are in places that have 100, 200, 300 kids. I know what life is like in these places and how difficult it is. And how are they ever going to achieve a dream? How are they ever going to be able to do something with their lives when nobody says that they matter? They just exist in a warehouse. And what I say also to people when you're growing up and getting on in life is always remember this. The most important thing in all your life will be to touch the soul of one person and help that person, to make that person feel that they're important, that you've lifted them up, that you've said to them, you can be something, and I'll be there for you. I'll be your friend, and I'll help you out. 100,000 kids are losing everything because there's nothing out there for them. Help Us Help goes out and tries to touch the souls of these kids. Nashi in Saskatoon has rescued girls. And I keep saying, see, this is something that you say, I did something with my life. It doesn't always have to be, by the way, work. It's also what you do with your free time. It's not to sit there all the time on a computer or whatever, but to actually go out and meet these kids, or meet people in seniors' homes, or help out some way that when you say, I did something, and what I did was I touched that soul of that person and lifted them up to make them feel that somebody cared somewhere. So we're way over there in Ukraine, and we're over here, and we're touching souls. We're helping some kids, not all of them, but we should do a hell of a lot more in that vein, just because it's our community. I could have turned my back on the community a long time ago, but I realized that in my soul is the soul of a Canadian, but also the soul of a Ukrainian, because of my grandparents and because of my parents. And I take that very seriously in everything that I do. When people say to me, oh, what kind of name is Malarek? I said, Ukrainian, and I'm really damn proud of it. And that's my history, because no matter what happened to me in my early life, there's all kinds of things that happened to my mother and father in their life, and to my grandparents in their miserable life in Ukraine under the Soviet regimes, and getting here and giving us a really good life. So I guess my message always is, you got to go out there and live your dream, but live your spirit. Know that the spirit and the soul is in there, and you're going to go out there and do something that is important in your life, but also important in the lives of other people who are less fortunate. And that's one of the things that I think is really important, that you can touch the soul or help people who are less fortunate. I'd like to take some questions if anybody has any, because I talk too much.
Yeah, I think we can just give the students a couple of minutes to type some questions in the chat. However, I have a question. So as young students here entering like our late teens, early 20s now, I'm interested in hearing like, where were you at that point in your life? Because that's like a huge monumental decision point, at least for everyone here, like looking at going to universities, kind of career-wise. So what was going through your head at that time when you were at that age?
Well, at that age, I was trying to find myself, trying to establish where is it that I want to go? What is it that I want to do? And, I had one time I wanted to be a Air Force pilot so I could fly jets way high up in the sky and not have to care about what was happening below, just to escape it. But, I cannot live and never will be able to live in a military situation, having had that kind of an upbringing in the institutions. But I kept thinking, what is it? And it was kind of like serendipity, where I moved into this magazine, bringing coffee to writers and reading what they were doing. And I was saying, there's far more important things than that. And then I started to write. I wrote a couple of stories for them. And then the editor there said, hey, I've got a job for you, and you're going to be going to the Montreal Star. I still didn't know if this is what I wanted to do. But as soon as because they would send me to cover fires and police chases and murders, and I thought, oh, this is really not a thing for me. What is it? What is it about? And then suddenly it hit me. This is the door opening for me to do something significant, not just to be a stenographer at the Montreal Star, but to look at something. And what I did, my first investigation was on the child care system of Quebec. It was a 5-part series, and it opened the door for me, and eventually opened the door for me to go to the Globe and Mail, because they were reading what I was writing, and they wanted to bring me in and see what I would do, across Canada, nationally, in investigations. And the same thing that happened for CTV and CBC when they brought me in. So at an early age, you oftentimes don't know, but you can change. It's not this solid one-way street or a very narrow path. You can go off to the left, you can go off to the right, you can go north, you can go south, you can go east, you can go west. Things change. And when you're younger, I was brought up think you have to get a job where you're going to stay for 50 years or 25 years and get your pension. I didn't want to be stuck in a job where I would be there for 50 years or 25 years. I'm in a profession that I've been in for that long period of time, but I moved from here to there, to there, to there, thinking there's something different than I can do, but always with the thought that I want to do something that's important. And it worked, but it was not easy. It wasn't easy going through school and trying to find what is that path, because it's difficult for everybody. And if you have all kinds of issues at home and troubles and things that are bugging you, it's hard to get that out of your head so that you can go forward and say, okay, the path is clear. I have an idea of what I want to do, and go after it. But always go after it. If you have an idea, try it.
I have a question, if I may. Wow, what an incredible life story of dedication and going towards your goals. And again, especially that you touched your role in making changes in the Ukrainian community outside of Canada. That's really close to my heart. And what I was thinking while listening to you, I listened to you as an adult, not a teenager. And many things that you mentioned of troubles, of challenges can be applied to adults as well, right? We all go through the lifetime challenges. My question to you would be, who was your mentor and when did you feel that you've got someone as a mentor to support you? And did you have that person who was going with you shoulder to shoulder for some time until you just flew out in the sky as the grown-up?
I stood in front of a judge when I was 17 and a half. The prosecutor and my probation officer was asking that I get 5 years. They wanted me off the street. The judge looked at me and he said, and he had my file in front of him. It was about this thick. And he looked at the first page and he said, this is a 7-year-old boy who was scared of his shadow, was afraid of everything, and he goes into the system totally in fear. He comes out and everybody is in fear of him. What happened in those 10 years? He looked at me and he said, you know, Victor, I'm going to give you the chance because I see something in you. I don't know what it is, but I see something in you. And that was a light bulb that went on in my head. I went back to high school and all I really cared about in high school was dancing and having a good time. And I ended up doing something I never thought I would do. And I joined the musical and met a completely different crowd of kids. But I was by the way, I was given a detention. So I was sitting in the main hall watching them practice the musical. And it was a bunch of grade 8 guys singing. It was South Pacific and they were supposed to be sailors. And they were singing, there ain't nothing but a dame. And I thought, gee, singing there ain't nothing like a dame with an alto voice. There ain't nothing like it. I said, and I started to laugh. And the director came up to me. He was an Englishman who had come from Britain and was teaching at the high school. And he said, what's so funny? And I said, there ain't nothing like a dame. I mean, these guys, like, their voices haven't dropped yet. So he said, well, you think you can do better? I said, I have a bunch of guys. We can go out there and be sailors. Of course, there were all these grade 12 girls there. And I was looking at them going, yeah, they're the nurses. I'm going to be a sailor. And we went in. He ended up becoming a very good friend. And he understood me. And there were a couple of other teachers who understood where I was coming from and what was happening in my life. And they treated me more with kid gloves after I had come out of all this trouble. So there was that. You know, when I was at Weekend Magazine, there was an older editor there who was my boss. And he was the one who got me a job at the Montreal Star as a police reporter. And, you know, there were people that I met marking in periods of my life. There was no real one mentor, but there were people who wanted to make a difference in my life, and they helped me along the way. They say, hey, Victor, here's the way you should do this. Here's where you should go for that. This is what you should do. And I realized that they were there to help me get on with doing what I really wanted to do, and that was become a very tough and important investigative reporter. So there are mentors.
Yes, thank you so much for that insight. And just on that note, for our students here, how would they go about finding those mentors for themselves, do you think?
You know, there are people who when you see them, they show acts of kindness. It's just an eye contact. There's just something about them. I've met some really very, very great and good people in my life, but I read people very quickly. I'm a very, very, I learned a long time ago, trust your gut. Always trust that innate thing that you have, that sixth sense, because that's an important thing in your life. You can read a person very quickly. And when you read that person and you get this bad feeling in your stomach, it's not gas. It's not an upset stomach over something that you ate. Listen to it. But I've met so many people around the world that I was so happy to have interviewed them or to have been around them. But there were others where I read them very quickly and went, now you're going to feel the wrath of Malarek, because I know you are a bad person. You have done something really wrong, and I'm going to go after you, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to make your life more miserable than the lives that you have made miserable. And I've gone after bad guys by the hundreds over my life. And, I listen, and listen to that feeling in my gut. Gut Instinct was the name of one of my books, and it talked about why certain things happened and how I would listen. I look at people and I suddenly say, well, that's such a good person, and you learn something from them. You know, I used to play trumpet, and I played in a band back in 1967. I went down to New Orleans and played in a rhythm and blues band, and same thing in Montreal. And I met good people, musicians. A lot of them are really cool people, and you just know there's somebody that you'll cling on to. It may not be all your life, you know. There are some people who have very close friends, you know, closer than their brother and their sisters, closer than their parents, and that's important to have that. You always need somebody to bounce ideas on and off of, and you have to listen, and they have to listen. You know, it's important that when you meet someone, you'll feel it. And if something is saying, be careful, oh my God, be careful, because you'll get burned 100 times out of 100 when you ignore your sixth sense, ESP, you know, extrasensory perception. It's there, and we all have it. And I was brought up, by the way, very early on by my mother, never to let go of that. I believe I have a guardian angel. I believe that there's something bigger out there. And that's what stays inside me. I read it very quickly. And when I read it, I know when to back off, and I know when to go forward, and I know when to trust and when not to trust. And when people have come up to me and said, yeah, but he's a really nice guy, she's a really nice person, and I go, I don't know. And then I say, okay, fine, I'll try. Well, that was to my detriment. So there are people out there. You'll always meet people out there that are really good and want good things to happen to you. And they're the kind of people you should go towards and say, hey, you know, I really like you.
Thank you so much. And so just touching on something that you brought up a little bit earlier, I know you mentioned like when you were in your sort of like late teens, early 20s, you were figuring out what to do with your life, essentially. And I'm sure a lot of our students are in a similar boat, trying to look at what schools they want to go to, what paths they want to pursue. So now, like in today's era, how do you suggest that these students go about figuring out all these different things that they might want to get into?
Yeah, you know, today I think it's more difficult sometimes than when it was when I was a kid, but more difficult in a sense of not the hardships in the physical hardships, but the psychological, mental hardships. This social media and the internet and everything else it throws so much information at you. It's constantly going that your mind spins, and it spins out of control. You know, when it really started to hit, and I was at W5 at the time, people would come up to me and they were always telling me this, that, this, that, this, you know, you got to look into this, you got to look into that. And I always go, look here. What does it say? And they go, what do you mean? I said, on my forehead, what does it say? And they go, it says full. I can't take any more information. And this is one of the things that I said to myself, I've got to sit back sometimes and just turn everything off and just sit somewhere and stare at I go to Greece to these little islands, and I sit there and I just stare out at the sea and I empty my mind, and other things come in and give you ideas and where to go and what to do, or just gives you peace of mind. But today for young people, there's so much information every day. It just bombards you. And I keep thinking, it would short circuit my brain. How do you stop it from being short circuited? And that's what you have to really work at, is how much time do I have to spend on this? And how valuable is it to me as a person? How valuable is it to me? And I go back to this, to my spirit. You know, it's just, if it's constant bombardment, you have to be able to sit back, stand back and say, I need to take some time. And time, when you do that, time has a way of clearing a path for you. Your path cannot be cleared when it has 6 million things being thrown at it. And I think that's the real difficulty of being a young person today, because with me, and the people I grew up with, we didn't have all of the tonnage. We had stuff here and stuff there. And, you know, you go to see a guidance counselor and they'd say, well, you know, this might be a good career for you. But now it's too much. you have to sit back and say, what is it that I really want to do? What would I be happy doing? What would be something that would drive my spirit, drive my soul, that would say, this is really interesting, and this is what I want to do with maybe not the rest of my life, but a good portion of my life, and you go for it. And it's not with a ton of information coming at you. You've got to be able to filter and then also be able to turn things off for a while. If you don't turn things off for a while, you're going to be lost all the time. Way too much stuff coming out. I cannot believe how much stuff comes at me just from people knowing me on the internet. And I can't get to all of it. I can't. And I just have to at some point say, you know what, I'm taking the day off, or I'm taking 3 days off. And after about a couple of days, I go, wow, it's been nice and quiet, because I'm a news hound too, but you don't change the world by watching it all the time, 24/7. It used to be 6 o'clock news and then 11 o'clock news. Now it's news every minute. Can't take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned taking a break and visiting those little private Greek islands. So would you mind sharing a little bit more about that? Have you gotten to go since the start of the pandemic?
No, but I listen, one of the things I came to a conclusion that over the last year and a half, I was too afraid to travel because I was too afraid of dying. And now I have to travel because I can't live my life afraid of dying. So I'm going to go back in May and sit on my little islands and stare out at the AGA and sea. And hopefully I also want to go back to Ukraine, because I have an idea for another book that I'm going to have to do some research on, which would deal with the war with that piece of garbage called Putin, and see where that goes. But sitting back sometimes, it's something, because it's almost like an addiction, because you have this freaking phone with you, or your iPad or whatever, and you keep looking at it and keep looking at it, and you don't want to turn it off because you might miss something. And then it's like an addiction. It takes me a day where I maybe look at it twice or 3 times, and then the next day 1 time, then all of a sudden 2 weeks later, I would come back to Canada after being away for 6 weeks, and maybe 3 or 4 months later, somebody would say something to me about something that happened in the world, and I go, oh, what? When did that happen? And I said, oh, it happened in early June. So, oh, I was on an island in Greece. I wasn't paying attention to the news, because you know what? Nothing changes. It's always just repeating. History seems to repeat itself. And I can't change it, and there's nothing I can do about it. Except in my little world, I will do the kinds of things that I think are important. But getting away from the bombardment of information and the bombardment of this stuff that just keeps coming at you, it takes, like me, to try to get off the street when I was a teenager, and to get away from the gangs, and to get away from the influence, and to get away from everybody's opinion of me, and to say, leave this behind. It was really difficult. Saying goodbye to all the guys that I knew was really difficult. And I eventually did it. But it's the same thing with information. You have so much of it coming at you, and friends and so-called friends and everybody else who wants to get your attention. And you have to be able to say, okay, enough for today, enough for this week, maybe enough for this month, and go off and find some peace of mind, because in that peace of mind, the clearness comes. You just suddenly see everything, the colors that are supposed to be there, the smells and the sounds and everything that's supposed to be there comes into your mind, and you see clearly. Not an easy task.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I guess just quickly on that last point, obviously it's definitely hard for all of us to unplug. So I guess, is there a way to remove yourself from your phone, but also in sort of moderation, so that you still keep in touch when you can?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, I have friends of mine who say, oh, I was woken up at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning with the phone going ding, ding, ding. And, there's a privacy thing that you can push. I think for me, it's from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Nothing happens, you know. But look, I'm not saying that you have to pull yourself away from everybody and everything. It's just that you have to pick your spots, pick your moments, pick the things that you're interested in, not everything that comes at you. I mean, I have so many people saying, join this group, join that group, join this thing, join that thing. Hey, I got 24 hours in a day. I sleep 6 or 7 of those hours. Other times I want to do other things with my life, but I can't keep seeing this. I have actually sat with friends where their phone kept going ding, 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 ding. And I said to them, look, if we're out at dinner or we're here all talking together, if that's what you want to do, then okay, fine, you go and do it. I have other things to do and I'll walk away. Because I just find it really rude that, you know, I want to spend time with you and talk with you and see what's going on, and all you're doing is ding, ding, ding. And wait a second, ding, ding, ding. Wait a second. No, goodbye. I had one close friend like that, drove me crazy, you know. And I said to him, you know, you're in love with your cell phone and the internet and whatever. So have fun with the rest of your life. And you just gotta find the time to just be you. And find the time to just be you with your friends, your family, your buddies, and say, all of that over there, it's over there. You know, I'll pick up on it tomorrow. And you'll find out that even though you got 300 messages, 299 were, who cares? But I know, look, I'm not saying get away from it. You know, it's an important part of today. But what you have to say to yourself as well is it's an important part of today, but it doesn't run my life. I run my life.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that great insight and the whole talk in general today. I'm sure our students learned a lot. I know I did. It was very informative. I think, Pani Oksana, we're good to wrap up? Okay,
Yeah.
Super. So again, thank you so much, Victor. Дякую всім, що були з нами. Дякую пані Оксані Левицькій за організацію. Дякую усім учителям, учням, що приєдналися, і дякуємо, що тримали камери включеними. Наша наступна зустріч відбуватиметься в лютому. З вами буде говорити аналітик глобальних питань та журналіст Михайло Боцюрків. Отже, дізнайтеся про нього і готуйте ваші питання. Я Олександра Голик. My name is Alexandra Holek, and it has been a pleasure being your moderator for today's session.